we are the second largest population, which stands at about 1.27 billion, next only to China. And the World Energy Outlook study of 2011 says that we would supersede China by 2025. The energy scenario is largely dominated by fossil fuels. About 70% of our energy, primary energy supply for the year 2010 had come from conventional fossil fuels, followed closely by biomass, which is to be noted was not for commercial purposes, but for domestic lighting and cooking. And if you look at the consumption side of energy, a good 42% is taken up by residential units for meeting their lighting and cooking requirements, followed by the industrial sector and then the transport sector. 35% of our population has no access to electricity of any kind. In terms of the quality of power, it's fairly poor, with outages from 2 to 20 hours on a daily basis and more than 16 hours in rural areas. In terms of transmission and distribution losses, we have a poor number there. It stands at about 35 to 38% in comparison to international standards of about 4 to 8%. And this is essentially because of the centralized grid system that we work on, where electricity is generated in centralized setups and through large transmission lines are taken away to distant areas. There's a huge disparity in the urban and rural infrastructure in terms of access as well as in infrastructure because of the centralized grid supply, and the design of the subsidies in India is actually very flawed. And if one looks at the figure, we would see that the amount of subsidies that India provides is about twice the spending that it does on health, about half the spending it does on education and infrastructure. And it amounts to about 14% of a GDP. Now, the definition of rural electrification in India is a problem in itself, because it says, the electricity policy of India says that even if 10% of the households in a village is electrified, the village is deemed to be electrified. So if you have 100 households and only 10 of them have access to electricity of whatever quality, okay, it's deemed to be an electrified village. So the numbers look good on the website, but when you look deeper into it, it has a lot of complexity hidden behind. India stood at about 66 gigawatts in 1991, and it grew up to over 199 gigawatts in 2012, and the numbers that I showed you in the earlier slide, where India has an installed capacity of 225 gigawatts in May 2013. The questions I throw again, which was thrown definitely by the South African team as well as the Brazilian team, is for whom is all this energy being generated? And will this capacity addition translate into improved energy access for the marginalized and the energy-starved population of India? Now, India's energy challenge is unique, and it lies in its ever-increasing demand of meeting the aspirations of the middle class and the urban, growing elite class, coupled with shortage of electricity and good quality energy. One of the key points that is coming forward at this point in time is that if India has to address its energy challenge, it cannot do it without ensuring energy equity. We cannot allow the energy guzzlers, a small population in India, to consume as much electricity at the cost of the larger population, which remains energy poor. Of course, unlike the West, I think India is in a position to make effective and meaningful transition, because 70% of our infrastructure is yet to come up. And here lies an opportunity for India to be able to be making choices to transition into an effective and meaningful low-carbon pathway, which is fairly different from the West, where you guys have already made that transition. But in India, we do have that space now, and this is where the civil society needs to be playing a vital role. The estimated potential of renewable energy in India stands at about 245 gigawatts, which is marginally higher than the current installed capacity of 225. Today, we have an installed capacity of about 28 gigawatts only. A large chunk, about 20 gigawatts, comes from wind. Small hydros account for only 3%. Solar photovoltaic definitely is on the rise. But of course, the concerns raised by the previous speaker from Brazil in terms of large and massive wind power projects which affect the livelihood of the people in those areas is a cause of concern, and therefore not all renewable power projects should be treated as a holy cow, and one needs to reflect on the footprints of renewables as well while positing a future development pathway for India. When you look at an international comparison of policies among the four or five top key emitters, India, US, Germany, and China, India has almost all the policies that are required for massive renewable energy promotion, theoretically, but it ranks fourth among the 4 countries in terms of generation of absolute numbers of renewable energy. There is a focus on renewables, but not on decentralized renewables in the Indian electricity policy. We have the solar mission, we have the wind mission, where the thrust is only on massive power projects running into thousands of megawatts. So that is how the energy scenario of India looks like. Equity, not only internationally but domestically, should be the point of departure, and we should not lose sight of the equity frame in India as part of our dialogue. And since we have most of the policies in place, maybe effective implementation of those policies could be a practical way forward. Create models of decentralized energy that we have been doing, that civil society has been doing in isolated pockets across India. And since 54% of our households don't have access to electricity, maybe off-grid solutions that are being promoted by the civil society should be taken up strongly. We should come up with creative ways of taxing the elite so that the polluters pay. And maybe it's time that we relook at our production and distribution patterns and try to revisit the whole idea of being local.